My boyfriend's parents lost their home to a fire on Christmas Day 22 years ago. It killed their family cat, Periwinkle. Over the 2 years we'd been together, he'd told me about it constantly. The smoke, the loss, the holiday, ruined forever. He knew I understood that kind of terror better than most people, because when I was 8 years old, I caused a house fire that nearly killed my entire family. We were trauma twins, or so I thought. That shared history was supposed to bring us closer. Instead, it became the weapon he'd used to destroy me. I was staying at his parents' house for the holidays, sleeping in the guest room down their long, dark hallway. At exactly 2 a.m., I jolted awake to pure chaos. Alarms screaming, dogs barking like they'd lost their minds, voices yelling over each other. My heart was already racing before my brain could catch up. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and ripped the charger straight out of the wall, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I tried to jam my feet into my slippers, but I was moving too fast, too panicked, and I fell forward, slamming my forehead directly into the corner of the dresser. The pain was instant and sharp, blood already trickling down my temple, but I didn't stop. I didn't even touch it. There was no time. I needed to get out. Now! Then I heard it. My boyfriend's little sister, maybe 10 years old, screaming down the hallway, "Fire! Fire!" My heart didn't just sink. It stopped. My throat closed up like someone had their hands around my neck. I couldn't breathe. I was 8 years old again, trapped in my childhood home. My mother's arms around me as she carried me through the smoke-filled hallway, her voice telling me not to look back. I could still smell the burning carpet. I could still hear my own screams. I stumbled into the hallway, my vision blurry from tears I didn't even know I was crying, and I found her. His little sister, standing there in her pajamas, terrified. I didn't think. I just acted. I scooped her up into my arms and ran. She giggled for a second, maybe from the adrenaline, maybe because she thought this was a game, but I was sprinting through the house like my life depended on it. I knocked over a picture frame on the wall and heard it shatter behind me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. We burst through the front door into the freezing December night. I put her down on the grass next to my boyfriend's dad, his stepmom, their 2 dogs, and his cousin, all of them already outside, all of them safe. My chest was heaving. My legs felt like they were going to give out, and that's when I noticed the warmth spreading down my thighs. Despite the cold air biting at my skin, I was warm. Too warm. My pajama pants were soaked, clinging to my legs, flapping against my skin as I moved. I had pissed myself. Completely, fully, from pure primal terror. I started crying harder, not just from the fear, but from the humiliation. I was a grown woman standing in my boyfriend's parents' front yard in urine-soaked pajamas with blood dripping down my face. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to die, but then I looked up. And everyone around me was cheering, high-fiving, smiling, laughing. My ears were ringing, my hands were shaking, and I was trying so hard not to have a full-blown panic attack that I could barely process what I was seeing. My boyfriend walked over to me with this huge grin on his face and grabbed my shoulders like we'd just won a game. "What are you doing?" I choked out, pulling away from him. "What is going on?" That's when I realized something was wrong. There were no sirens, no smoke, no flames. The house behind us was completely dark and silent, exactly as we'd left it. My boyfriend looked at my face, really looked at me for the first time, and I watched his smile falter. I was shaking so violently I thought I might collapse. He reached up and touched the bump on my forehead, the blood smearing under his fingers, and asked, "What happened to your head?" I slapped his hand away so hard it made a sound. "What the fuck is going on, eh?" I screamed. His stepmom stepped toward me, trying to put her hand on my shoulder, and I shrugged her off, like she'd burned me. That's when his dad, this man who'd always been so kind to me, so welcoming, stepped forward with this calm, indéchet, almost smug expression on his face. He pulled out his phone and held it up like a trophy. "We do this every year since the fire," he said, his voice steady and proud. "I time it." He turned the screen toward me. The numbers glowed in the dark. 2:13:50. 2 minutes and 13.5 seconds. That's a new family record. I stared at those numbers. 2:13:50. I will either remember them for the rest of my life or forget them immediately because I am so deeply traumatized by this moment that my brain might just delete it to protect me. I was shaking so badly I thought I was going to pass out. My vision was tunneling. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and called my friend who lived 5 minutes away. I needed to get out. I needed to leave, right now. My boyfriend's dad looked at us and said, voice dripping with irritation, "Come back in when you two figure out what your problem is." This man, who had been nothing but kind to me, was now treating me like I was the one being unreasonable. My boyfriend grabbed my arm and said, "I didn't think you'd react like this. You don't talk about your fire as much as I talk about mine, and you didn't lose as much as I did." I just stared at him. I felt heavy and weightless at the same time, like I was falling through the ground. He started trying to usher me back toward the house, talking about how I needed to go inside and change my clothes, like I was a child who'd had an accident. I shoved him, hard, with both hands. He stumbled back, and for a second I saw something flash across his face. Anger, resentment, something ugly. Then he called me a bitch and turned around and walked back into the house, leaving me standing alone in the dark in my piss-soaked pajamas. My friend pulled up a few minutes later. I climbed into her passenger seat, sitting on a beach towel she'd grabbed from her trunk. My boyfriend had been texting me non-stop, but I muted him. I couldn't look at the screen. I couldn't think about him. All I could think was, how could he not tell me about this? Why the fuck would he not tell me? Before we begin, tell us in the comments from which city are you watching. And at the end, do not forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. I thought our matching scars would protect me. When we pulled up to his parents' house 3 days before Christmas, I was actually excited. The house was beautiful in the classic suburban way. White siding, perfectly trimmed hedges, those expensive LED icicle lights draping from the gutters. His stepmom had put a wreath on every window. It looked like a Hallmark movie set, the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. I remember thinking that was ironic, considering what this family had been through. My boyfriend carried my bag inside, while his dad clapped me on the shoulder and told me to make myself at home. His little sister was decorating sugar cookies in the kitchen, and the 2 dogs, a golden retriever and some kind of terrier mix, immediately jumped all over me like I was a long-lost family member. It felt warm, safe, normal. That night over dinner, the conversation inevitably turned to the fire. It always did with his family. December 25th, 22 years ago. The blaze that destroyed everything they owned and killed their cat, Periwinkle. His dad described finding the cat's collar in the ashes, and his stepmom teared up, talking about how they'd spent that Christmas in a hotel room with nothing but the pajamas they'd escaped in. My boyfriend reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back because I understood. God, I understood. "At least you know what it's like," he said to me in front of his whole family, his voice soft and sincere. Not everyone gets it. I nodded, my throat tight. I didn't talk about my fire much, not the way he talked about his. I was 8 years old when I accidentally left a candle burning near the Christmas tree. I woke up to my mother screaming, carrying me through smoke so thick I couldn't see her face. We made it out with minutes to spare. The house was gutted, but we all survived. No one died, not even our dog. But the guilt, the nightmares, the way my chest still tightens when I hear a smoke alarm. That never went away. I thought having a boyfriend who understood that kind of trauma meant I'd finally found someone who would protect me from ever feeling that helpless again. I was wrong. I was dreaming about something peaceful when the world exploded. 2:00 am. The guest room was pitch black except for the faint glow of my phone charging on the nightstand. Then, suddenly, everything was noise. Deafening, overlapping, chaotic noise that punched through my sleep like a physical force. Alarms shrieking, dogs barking, not regular barking, but that frantic, desperate sound animals make when they sense danger. Voices yelling over each other, words I couldn't make out through the walls. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. That's what trauma does to you. It rewires your nervous system so that certain sounds don't go through your rational brain first. They go straight to the part of you that remembers dying. The part that remembers smoke and heat and your mother's arms dragging you toward a door you couldn't see. I sat up so fast I got dizzy. My heart was already slamming against my ribs, beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. Fight or flight. Except there's no fight when it comes to fire. There's only flight. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand, my hands shaking so badly I almost knocked it to the floor. The charger ripped out of the wall with a plasticky snap. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and tried to jam my feet into my slippers, but I was moving too fast, too uncoordinated, and my foot caught on the edge of the rug. I pitched forward, arms flailing, and my forehead slammed directly into the corner of the wooden dresser. The pain was immediate and bright, a sharp crack that made my vision white out for half a second. I felt something warm trickle down my temple. Blood, definitely blood, but I didn't stop. Yuck, I didn't even touch it. There was no time. My brain was screaming one word on repeat. Out! Get out! Get out now! The alarms were still going. The dogs were still barking. And then I heard it. A voice. High-pitched and terrified. My boyfriend's little sister, somewhere down the dark hallway, screaming at the top of her lungs, "Fire! Fire! Fire!" My heart didn't just sink, it stopped. I was 8 years old again, and this time I wasn't going to let anyone die. There's a difference between being scared and being certain you're about to die. Blood was dripping down the side of my face, warm and sticky, matting my hair to my forehead. My head was throbbing where I'd hit the dresser, a deep, pulsing pain that should have stopped me in my tracks, but I couldn't feel it. Not really. Pain is something your brain processes when it thinks you have time, when it thinks you're going to survive long enough for pain to matter. I didn't have time. My throat was so dry I could barely swallow. My chest felt like someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribs and was pulling them tighter with every breath. I knew that feeling. I'd felt it before when I was 8 years old, when the smoke filled my bedroom and my lungs couldn't find clean air. This is what dying feels like, I thought. This is what it felt like then, and this is what it feels like now. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold my phone. The screen was too bright in the darkness, and I couldn't focus on it, couldn't make my fingers work properly to unlock it or call for help. It didn't matter. What was I going to do? Call 911? By the time they got here, we'd all be dead. The alarms were still screaming, the dogs were still barking, and somewhere in the chaos, I could hear my boyfriend's voice yelling something I couldn't make out. But all I could hear was my mother's voice from 20 years ago. Don't look back. Don't breathe in. Just run. So I ran. I stumbled into the hallway. My legs weak and unsteady, my vision blurry from tears I didn't even know I was crying. The hallway was so dark I couldn't see where I was going. I put my hand on the wall to steady myself, and it was cold under my palm. Too cold, not hot. Why wasn't it hot? But my brain wasn't processing that. My brain was processing smoke and heat and death. I could see my mother's face in my mind, contorted with fear as she carried me. I could feel her arms around me, her body shielding mine. I was 8 years old and I was 28 years old, and I was both at the same time, trapped in two fires, two moments, two versions of the same nightmare. And then I heard her again, the little sister, screaming for help. I wasn't thinking, I was operating on pure animal instinct. She was standing in the hallway in her little pink pajamas, her eyes wide and terrified, her mouth open mid-scream. Fire! Fire! She looked so small, so breakable. And in that moment, my brain made a calculation it didn't even tell me about. I could save her. I had to save her. Even if I couldn't save myself, I could at least get her out. I didn't ask if she could walk, I didn't know. I didn't ask where the fire was or if anyone else was still inside. I just moved. I scooped her up into my arms, her body light and warm against my chest, and I ran. She let out this startled little giggle. Just for a second, maybe from the shock or the adrenaline, or because she didn't understand what was happening. But I was already moving too fast to register it. My bare feet were slapping against the hardwood floor, my arms locked around her torso, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The hallway was so dark I could barely see where I was going. I was running blind, using muscle memory and desperation to guide me toward where I thought the front door was. My shoulder clipped the corner of the wall and I bounced off it, barely keeping my balance. The little sister's arms wrapped around my neck, holding on tight, and I could feel her breath against my collarbone. Fast, panicked, alive. Then I heard the crash. My hip knocked into something on the wall. A picture frame, I realized too late, and it flew off its hook and shattered on the floor behind us. Glass exploded across the hardwood in a sound that should have stopped me, should have made me careful, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't. I just kept running, my feet somehow missing the shards, my entire body focused on one single goal. The door. I could see it now. The front door. That rectangle of darkness that meant outside, that meant air, that meant safety. I shifted the little sister's weight in my arms, pushed harder, and crashed through it like it was the finish line of a race I didn't even know I'd entered. Cold air hit my face. We were outside. We were alive, and that's when everything got so much worse. I didn't notice it at first because I was too busy trying not to pass out. I set the little sister down on the grass next to the others. My boyfriend's dad, his stepmom, his cousin, the two dogs, and that's when my legs almost gave out. The adrenaline was still coursing through my system like electricity, making my hands shake and my vision swim. My chest was heaving, pulling in great gasping breaths of cold December air that burned my lungs. I was alive. We were alive. That's all that mattered, except I was so warm. It didn't make sense. It was freezing outside. I could see my breath in the air, could feel the frost on the grass under my bare feet, but my legs felt hot, uncomfortably hot, and wet. My pajama pants were clinging to my thighs in a way that felt wrong, heavy and cold and damp, the fabric flapping against my skin when I moved. And that's when I realized, oh God, oh no, 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 I had pissed myself. Completely, fully. The entire front of my pajama pants was soaked through, the moisture spreading down my inner thighs, cold now in the night air. I could feel it, I could smell it, and there was no hiding it. No way to pretend it hadn't happened. The humiliation hit me like a second wave of panic, somehow worse than the terror of the fire itself. I was a grown woman, 28 years old, standing in my boyfriend's parents' front yard in urine-soaked pajamas, with blood dripping down my face from the gash on my forehead. This wasn't just embarrassing. This was the kind of humiliation that follows you forever, the kind that plays on repeat in your brain at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep. I started crying harder, my whole body shaking with sobs I couldn't control. Part of me was still processing the trauma of the fire, or what I thought was a fire, and part of me was drowning in shame. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me whole. I wanted to wake up and realize this was all a nightmare. But then I looked up at the people around me, and they were cheering. They were celebrating like they'd just won the lottery. High fives. Actual high fives. I watched through blurry, tear-filled eyes as my boyfriend's cousin slapped his dad's hand, both of them grinning like idiots. The stepmom was hugging the little sister, who was bouncing on her toes with excitement. The dogs were wagging their tails, feeding off the energy. And my boyfriend was walking toward me with this huge smile on his face, his arms outstretched like he was about to congratulate me on something. "What are you doing?" I choked out, stumbling backward when he tried to grab my shoulders. "What is going on?" My ears were ringing. That high-pitched frequency that happens when your nervous system is so overloaded it starts shorting out. I could barely hear my own voice. Everything felt muffled and distant, like I was underwater. I was trying so hard to hold in the panic attack that was clawing its way up my throat, trying so hard to make sense of what I was seeing, but nothing was computing. There were no sirens. I realized that suddenly. No fire trucks. No smoke. The house behind us was completely dark and silent, exactly as we'd left it. Just a normal house on a normal street in the middle of a normal night. My boyfriend's smile faltered when he actually looked at my face. Really looked at me, and I watched something shift in his expression. Confusion, maybe concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. He reached up toward my forehead, toward the bump that was throbbing with every heartbeat, his fingers almost touching the blood that had dried on my temple. I slapped his hand away so hard the sound echoed across the yard. "What the fuck is going on?" I screamed. His stepmom moved toward me, her hand extended like she was approaching a scared animal. "Honey, it's okay." I shrugged her off before she could touch me, my whole body recoiling. Nothing about this was okay. Nothing. That's when his dad stepped forward. Calm, casual, almost amused. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and held it up like it was a trophy, the screen glowing in the darkness. "We do this every year since the fire," he said, his voice steady and proud. "I time it." He turned the screen toward me. The numbers burned into my vision. 2:13:50. 2 minutes and 13.5 seconds, he continued, beaming. "That's a new family record." I stared at those numbers, and something inside me shattered. The boyfriend I thought I knew disappeared in that moment. I was shaking so violently I could barely stand. My vision was tunneling, black spots creeping in from the edges. I could feel my throat closing up, my lungs refusing to pull in enough air. I was having a full-blown panic attack in front of his entire family, and all I could think was, "I need to leave. I need to get out of here. I need to go home." I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and called my friend Sarah, the only person I knew who lived close enough to come get me. My voice was barely a whisper when I asked her to pick me up. 5 minutes, she said. She'd be there in 5 minutes. That's when my boyfriend's dad spoke again, his voice colder now, irritation creeping into his tone. "Come back inside when you two figure out what your problem is." He turned and walked toward the house, the stepmom and cousin following behind him. The little sister skipped after them, completely unbothered, like this was all just a fun game. I stood there in my wet pajamas, blood drying on my face, and looked at my boyfriend. The man I'd been dating for 2 years. The man who knew what fire had done to me. The man I thought understood. "I didn't think you'd react like this," he said, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Judgment. Disappointment. Like I'd failed some test I didn't know I was taking. "React like what?" I managed to get out, my voice cracking. "Like someone who thought they were going to die?" He shook his head, crossing his arms over his chest. "You don't talk about your fire as much as I talk about mine," he said, like that explained everything. And you didn't lose as much as I did." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward. "What?" It came out as barely a whisper. "We lost everything," he continued, his voice matter of fact. "Our whole house, all our belongings, periwinkle. Your house got damaged and you moved on. It's not the same." I stared at him. This man who I'd held when he cried about his childhood trauma. This man who I'd comforted and supported and loved. He was telling me my trauma didn't count because I hadn't lost enough. I felt heavy and weightless at the same time, like gravity had stopped working. My brain couldn't process what he'd just said, that my trauma was somehow less valid than his because I hadn't lost a pet, because my family had survived, because I'd chosen not to turn my childhood nightmare into my entire personality the way he had with his. I just stood there, staring at him, my mouth slightly open, but no words coming out. The cold air was biting at my wet legs. The blood on my forehead had dried into a crusty, itchy mess. My head was pounding, my whole body was shaking, and the man I loved was standing in front of me, telling me I had no right to be traumatized. He sighed, like I was being difficult, like I was the problem here. Then he stepped forward and grabbed my arm, his fingers wrapping around my wrist. "Come on," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone people use with children who are throwing tantrums. "Let's get you inside. You need to change your clothes." He was trying to pull me toward the house, like I was a little kid who'd had an accident and needed to be cleaned up, like I was an embarrassment he needed to hide before the neighbors saw. Something snapped inside me. I shoved him. Hard, with both hands planted against his chest. He stumbled backward, his eyes going wide with surprise, and for a split second I saw something flash across his face. Shock, then anger, then something uglier, something mean. "Are you serious right now?" he said, his voice rising. "After everything—" "Don't touch me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. His face twisted. "You're being such a bitch about this." There it was. The word hung in the cold air between us like poison. He said it so casually, so easily, like he'd been thinking it for a while and was just now giving himself permission to say it out loud. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat had closed up completely. He stared at me for another second, waiting for me to apologize, to back down, to go inside and play along with his family's insane tradition like a good girlfriend should. When I didn't move, he shook his head in disgust. Then he turned around and walked back into the house, leaving me standing alone in the dark in my piss-soaked pajamas. Sarah's headlights cut through the darkness exactly 5 minutes later, just like she promised. I climbed into her passenger seat without saying a word. She'd brought a beach towel from her trunk. She didn't ask why I needed it, just handed it to me through the window before I got in. I spread it across the seat and sat down, the fabric rough and sandy against my wet pajamas. The smell of chlorine in summer was so out of place it almost made me laugh. Almost. Sarah looked at me, really looked at me, taking in the blood on my forehead, the tears streaking down my face, the wet stains on my pants that I knew she could see even in the dim light. "Hospital?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "Just home. Please." She put the car in drive without another word. My phone was buzzing in my lap, text after text lighting up the screen. I could see his name at the top of each notification, but I couldn't read the words, didn't want to read them. My thumb found the mute button and pressed it, and suddenly there was silence. Beautiful, blessed silence. I leaned my head against the cold window and watched his parents' house disappear behind us. The Christmas lights on the gutters, the perfect wreath on the door, the warm glow from the windows where his family was probably inside now, laughing about their new record, completely unbothered by the fact that they'd just traumatized someone. "You okay?" Sarah asked after a few minutes, her voice soft. I thought about that question. Was I okay? No, obviously not. I was sitting in my best friend's car in piss-soaked pajamas with a head wound and a boyfriend who just called me a bitch for having PTSD. Nothing about this was okay, but I was safe. For the first time in hours, maybe for the first time in this entire relationship, I was finally safe. No, I said honestly, my voice hoarse from crying. But I'm out, and that's something. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. My phone buzzed again in my lap, still muted, his name still flashing across the screen. I turned it face down and watched the dark streets pass by outside the window. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I wasn't going back. Here's what I know, now that I didn't know then. Shared trauma doesn't equal shared empathy. My boyfriend weaponized his pain to minimize mine, then called it love. That's not love. That's trauma gaslighting. Just because someone has suffered doesn't give them the right to rank your suffering below theirs. A partner who turns your nightmare into a competition you didn't know you were losing isn't protecting you. They're using you. True love creates a safe harbor. What his family created was a timed drill where my terror became their entertainment. I never went back, and I've never pissed myself from fear since.